Hi there. Welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local, the podcast where you can find inspiration, tips, and recipes for enjoying more local food and drink. I am David Crowley, your host. In this episode, we will be chatting with Kristin Weeks from Dirt and Dough about eating local fish. Kristin is a food blogger from the Pacific Northwest. She loves writing about cooking from scratch, and her blog is dedicated to homemade recipes and homegrown produce. She is a sourdough baker, a gardener, and loves to camp and be outdoors with her family. Hi, Kristin. Welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you on here. It was about a week ago. We were in a Clubhouse chat room, new platform for people who haven't checked that out yet. And I heard you talking about your interest in catching local fish and that being part of how you feed your family. And I really wanted to hear. I thought that was an angle of local food we really hadn't covered a lot on this podcast yet. So that's a topic we'll get into. But first, I want to hear about your backstory and how you got interested in food in general and cooking and all that fun stuff. So let's hear a little bit about that to get us warmed up.
Yeah, thanks, David. I would say that my food journey really started once my husband and I got married. Kind of in the beginning, we were newlyweds and we knew nothing about cooking. Like, we were actually pretty terrible. And I used to think like top ramen with a poached egg was fancy and just didn't really know what to do. We did start a garden our very first year. That was something that was really important to us. And I think just having that fresh food in the summer on hands kind of sparked this interest in learning how to prepare food from our garden. And then when my son was born back in 2016 is when it really took off. I decided it was time for me to stay at home with the kids. And that was one area of my life that definitely wasn't strong. And I made it a goal to learn how to cook. Since I was at home with my kids now, it was important for the health of our family. And what was turned into kind of a love quickly turned into an obsession. I wanted to learn everything that I possibly could about cooking and expanding my garden and getting fresh food into the house. And then in 2019, I had a friend introduce the sourdough world to me. And again, I had to dive in and learn everything I possibly could and started teaching other friends how to cook as well as make bread. And that's when I had a friend say, hey, why don't you start a blog and share this information? Have it all written down somewhere. So that's how my blog came to be. One day I was out in my garden and came inside because I had to tend to my loaf of sourdough and wash the dirt out of my fingernails just to turn around and get big old clumps of dough stuck in them. And I thought, I think that name fits. So that's how my website came to be.
Dirt and Dough. I was going to ask him, but your story led right up to that very nicely. I have some common elements with your story and a few divergences. I similarly, it wasn't when I was married, but when I was first out of college and on my own and had to figure out how to eat for myself, I started with knowing how to do one or two things and then wound up cooking on a date for the woman who's now my wife of many years. And I had to up my game to learn how to cook something else and, gradually built from there. But I do also know how then for me, we were then married for a number of years before having our child. And so we started getting into going to, more into restaurants and enjoying food. And then when you're at home or and not able to get out like you can when you don't have a kid, it was like, to duplicate that good food we were getting at these restaurants, I better up my cooking game. So, but the two parts where I diverge is I definitely have not gotten into gardening. We've killed a few plants on some vain attempts, and then haven't gotten into the baking either. So anyway, but that's a few of your elements of your story crossed over with mine. So I wanted to share that. But I'd like to hear, I mean, I think you kind of maybe hinted at a little with the focus on fresh food, but this is a podcast about local food. So let's hear a little more about, how you got interested in that in general before we start talking more about that fishing side of things.
Yeah, I would say I was definitely more exposed to it when I was younger. I grew up, family that loved to fish, and my grandma was a gardener. But I would say that my interest and my appreciation for it didn't really develop until I was in, kind of my married life and with kids. So I think it kind of took a few years, and kind of looking back on the experiences that I had as a kid. I've grown up in Washington my entire life. We used to go camping all the time and all year round as well. We would camp through the fall and winter. And
Right.
there was a little town on the Washington coast that we would go camp at. And we would camp right in the middle of the marina. So you had the docks and the marina and all the big ships coming in on one side of you, and then the ocean hitting the jetty on the other side. And I just remember being able to walk down to the docks and throw out some crab pots, and
Hmm.
then pick them up at the end of the day and come back. And we would all, cook crab by the fire. And I grew up with uncles and grandpas and cousins that we would camp at lakes and rivers and just spend a lot of time outside fishing. And at the beach, we would love to go clam digging as well. That's kind of a special activity out on the Washington coast, and one that my family definitely loves. And I now drag my kids out there, and I tell them someday they'll drag their kids out there as well. But it's just a fun experience to take my kids down to the beach and harvest, their limit of clams. And then we take them back and show them how to clean them and cook them. And I would just say, just building off just those experiences I had as a kid myself, and now kind of doing the same thing with my family. My husband fished a little bit growing up, but I think being around my family where everybody does it, I have some family members that are in the commercial fishing industry. So it's just been such a big part of my life that it's definitely something I want to continue and teach my kids, and then hopefully their kids as well. The importance of it and just how much fun it can be as well.
Well, that's great. I think, we, a lot of folks think of local food first, thinking about produce, but, if you're eating fish and other and meat as well, it's great to think about how can you source them locally. And of course, catching your own fish is sure one
Yeah.
good way to ensure that the fish is local. So let's delve into that a little bit more. So you've talked about finding or harvesting, I guess the right term, the shellfish. And
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about how you're preparing after you get the. Do you have favorite ways to prepare the clams and other shellfish?
Yeah, so the clams are relatively easy to clean. You just take the shell off, and then they're really easy just to get all the sand out of them. My grandma taught me a really cool way to freeze clams. After you clean them out, you freeze them in a mason jar with water, and then you keep them in the freezer. And then after a while, the water turns into kind of that clam stock. And
Huh.
so I
Oh,
really love to repurpose that, because clams don't have a ton of flavor, especially
right,
once you add
right.
it to soups and dips. So just having that little reserve stock is a great way to add even more flavor into your when you make chowders and things like that. So for shellfish, I would definitely say we lean more to the chowders. That is my favorite. My kids absolutely love it as well, which it's kind of hard to get kids to eat seafood sometimes. But
Yeah.
when it's chopped up and thrown in a soup with some potatoes, they just devour it. And then we also have the little manila clams. They're the smaller ones. They're like your
Mm.
classic, clamshell shape.
Yeah.
For those, we call them steamers here
Oh
because
yeah,
that's
yeah, sure.
just,
We have that. Where
yeah.
I'm in the Boston area, New England coastline. Steamers are
Oh,
popular. Yeah.
yep, yep. And we love to do that. My family will go out and we'll bring several limits back, and it won't last the evening. Just steam one big pot of them. And we usually do that with like some garlic butter. And I would say for shellfish, those are my favorite two ways to use that seafood.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. That sounds good. And are you going out and Northwest is obviously a great place for all kinds of seafood. Are you
Mhm.
doing your own fishing of other kinds of fish that you find in your area as well?
Yeah, we try to make it out to the ocean at least once a year to go crabbing. We love
Yep.
having, fresh crab in our freezer. And it's really expensive. So if we can make a
Mm.
weekend of it and get, a few limits, it's really nice to have frozen crab on hand throughout the years. My husband is more into the salmon fishing than I am. So he does that a couple times a year as well. We do a lot of lake fishing, which is
Okay.
trout in our area. We do like to camp a lot. And so taking kids out and teaching them how to trout fish and then coming back, and that's always done on the campfire. After a long day of playing at the lake, we love to, fillet up a fish and teach the kids how to put it in the tin foil and put some butter and garlic and some fresh lemon and cook it over the campfire. They always find that to be a really special experience. And it's amazing how much kids will eat fish once they're a part of the entire process and kind of watch it from start to finish.
Oh, I love that idea. Yeah, engaging in the process. That's definitely a good tip. And the other thing that sort of seems to be a little between the lines for me is I do eat fish. I'll say I grew up in a family that my parents didn't care for fish. They sort of had the routine of when they were growing up having to eat fish on Fridays. They're Catholic, and it was
Mm-hmm.
probably severely overcooked, probably not fresh and local and that sort of thing. So when they were grown-ups, they're like, we're not eating fish. But so I had to acquire the taste and learn how to cook it as an adult. But you're clearly different. Both sounds like you came up eating it and now your kids are. So that's
Yeah.
great. But so for me though, I haven't had as much experience, sort of like doing that, sort of catching it, preparing it. You made it sound fairly easy. I personally, it sounds a little intimidating to me to get that fish out of the water and go from that to it's your dinner. So you made it sound like it's maybe not that difficult. You don't have to go blow by blow, but I don't know if you want to alleviate, if that worry, if anybody's got that, that's maybe not as intimidating as it needs to be.
I can see how it would be intimidating. I think if you've never done the whole process, salmon, filleting a salmon or a fish, that can be very difficult if you haven't practiced it. So I guess
Yeah.
that would be my biggest tip is, we like to, when growing up, I practiced on trout. So it wasn't
Okay.
this big salmon fillet that,
Right.
it's like, oh, if I ruin this, that's a very expensive piece of fish. No, we would
Right.
practice on kind of the smaller stuff or things from the river and the lakes. But that's what it comes down
Hmm.
to is just practice with seafood.
Yep.
I definitely was not great in the beginning. And, my husband's still learning different techniques. There's so many resources out there on,
Yep.
on Google and YouTube on how to clean and fillet fish that I just think with some practice is how you get efficient at it. Seafood can be a very long process to clean. I know when we've gotten big limits of crab, I'm spending hours cracking and cleaning and storing. But the nice thing is a lot of times you come home with a lot of it, right? So when my husband goes
Yep.
salmon fishing, he'll come home with several. So you're only doing it one time. You're
Okay. Right.
processing,
Right.
you're
Yeah.
breaking it down and you're freezing it. And now we have a freezer that has 10 fillets in it for the year. So it's not having
Oh,
to
that's
do it
great.
one at a time. It's usually
Hmm.
in bigger batches.
Yep.
So I would say that's the nice part about seafood is you are just doing it unless you're fishing all the time.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's only a couple of times a year that we actually have to process it.
Yeah. And when I get salmon, it is already has been filleted. I don't even have a sense like what's the average weight of the salmon that your husband's catching and bringing home?
So the ones my husband catches usually range from a pound to about a pound and a half for a fillet,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
then sometimes we'll break it up even further from there, depending on what size we want to cook up. But they
Yeah.
can range from a couple of pounds up to you can get some pretty big fish in this area where
Yeah.
you can have multiple 1 pound fillets. So it really
Nice.
depends.
Great.
Yeah.
And do you have a favorite recipe for any of the salmon, or you mentioned trout as well? If and we can add links to any that happen to be on your site, but just any
Yeah.
favorite ideas or ways you like to prepare either of those or both of those.
So, my favorite way to prepare salmon is really to keep it simple. I think
Hmm.
a lot of people can be very intimidated by cooking salmon. It can dry out easily.
Right.
And if, and just like with cleaning, if you haven't had the experience with cooking it, it can be pretty intimidating. But I would say my biggest advice would be that salmon doesn't need a whole lot. It
Yeah.
doesn't need a lot of cooking. It doesn't need a lot of prepping, and it really doesn't need a lot of ingredients.
Hmm.
How I like to make it is just with either butter or olive oil, fresh herbs, maybe a little bit of garlic, and then lemon. And that's about all
Yeah.
salmon really needs to shine. I
Yeah.
do like to every now and then put a pesto sauce on top after
Hmm.
I've baked it. We put
Yeah.
like a homemade pesto on top of it if we have basil in the garden, which is a
Yeah.
really great way to prepare it as well, because you get the freshness of the salmon paired with just the fresh basil from the garden. And that's probably one of our favorite ways this summer that we've done it.
Yum. I like that too. I do that. I do something similar. I do love the combo. I like pesto on fish in general, especially like
Mm-hmm.
not having that, from being a kid loving fish, just a little something like that to
Yeah.
freshen it up or add a little more flavor. I do definitely like that. Cool. And I definitely agree. I tend to stay away from ordering salmon at restaurants because I'm always just going to wind up complaining that it's like overcooked or something like that.
Overcooked.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Now, it's obviously the best way to guarantee that you're getting fresh local fish is to get it yourself
Mm-hmm.
or your husband brings it home. Beyond
Right.
that, I'm curious, and maybe you don't even need to that much, but if you have experience and tips related to for folks who want to find and purchase good, fresh local fish, ideas for how to do that and how to find something that's truly fresh.
Yeah. Um, I would say if you are on a coast area where there are commercial fishing, I think Amy over at the Copper Table kind of touched on that she's able to go down to the docks and
Yeah.
purchase fresh seafood right from the boats. I think that's a great way to do it. A lot of times, those smaller fishing towns also have fresh markets that they sell their catch
Hmm.
at, and that's another
Hmm.
great way to support those smaller businesses as well as getting your own fresh seafood. Farmers markets are another great way because sometimes they'll travel from the coastline, inland and kind of have different farmers markets that they'll set up. I know we have an oyster farm in our area that I go to my local farmers market to get fresh oysters instead of driving 2 hours to the beach. So that's always really convenient. And then I would also say there's this website. It's called localcatch.org. And I sent you that link, David.
Yeah,
And
great.
it's a really cool map that shows all the different areas where you can purchase fresh seafood. And then it also has an option for delivery. So if you're not in an
Mm.
area that has, you know, seafood fishing available, there are places that do ship as well. So that would be another great resource to check out to see where in your area you can find fresh seafood.
Oh, that's great. And I know for our area, it's not that far as the crow flies, but you get into traffic. It's a bit of a project to get to actual, if like from where I am to get to a fishing town at the right time. But like you say, farmers markets. There, most farmers markets around here. There's
Mm-hmm.
often a couple vendors that have local fish. The other thing I would mention is one of my recent guests has this local food delivery service. I often get produce, but you can add on local
Oh,
fish, and there are
yeah.
a couple. So we often get I love salmon's probably my favorite, but my son is haddock is his number one, and so
Oh,
we get local haddocks local in the area, so we'll get that often thrown into our share along with some veggies. So there are definitely a lot of options out there, and it's definitely
mm-hmm.
worth checking out. Because if you're, I don't know if you know much about this. I kind of only know sort of at 30,000 feet that if you're just getting fish at the grocery store, a lot of that, if it can be coming from literally halfway across the
Mm-hmm.
globe. I don't know if you know anything about that as it relates to where you might be getting fish if you're not looking for local specifically. I don't know if you've come across.
Yeah, I tend to not, just because we have access to,
Yeah.
a freezer of seafood. I tend to every once in a while I'll pick some up. I know, and I think talking to the butcher that's there and learning too about where it comes from, there's certain grocery stores in our areas that have a little bit fresher
Yeah.
selection that is more locally caught, just because I'm in an area where, I mean, I'm really close to Seattle. So I'm in an area where we do get a lot of fresh seafood.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's great. And I know where when I do get it at a grocery store, that's the same thing. You can look; they usually have a label if it's local, and here it's you would I would think there'd be more that would be here, but I think some of the
Yeah.
fishing industry here, is stuff that's like packed into they're making like fish cakes with it, like some of that bigger processing
Right.
stuff as opposed to getting on individual families' dinner table. So you do have to look. It sometimes like with local food does take effort, but it's worth the effort because it's so much
It's worth
better.
it.
It's so much better. Any other tips?
Yeah.
Any other tips on sort of either finding or preparing local fish that you'd like to share?
So another tip that I would probably give if you're interested in starting and getting into kind of catching and harvesting your own fish is some great resources that you could check out is just your local fish and wildlife department.
Oh, good
Usually
idea.
those websites have great information on, how to get started or where to go. And even in Washington, I know ours has resources on where to buy as well. So
Oh,
that could be
good, great.
another great resource to see in your area who is selling fresh fish. So that would be one of my recommendations. And then even just local sports stores is a
Hmm,
good, I mean, the
okay.
people there are typically very avid, fishermen themselves and
Yeah.
are just a wealth of information. And then just getting out there and doing it. I know we have learned so much just by being down on the docks and talking with other people that are out crabbing and, oh, what do you make with it? And we're sharing
Mm-hmm.
recipes and ideas
Oh, that's
and,
great.
you know, tips and tricks on how to make it. So I think just when you're out there, fishing or if you're clamming or crabbing, just talking to the people around you is also a great way to kind of learn more information on how to prepare it and how to
Yep.
clean it and things to make with it. So,
I love that suggestion. Connecting with the local fishermen, definitely. That just reminds me. I was talking about local fish in this area once, and I mentioned haddock. I had somebody who was working for me, in sort of my day job at a nonprofit, whose father was a commercial fisherman in Gloucester, which is a well-known
mm-hmm.
fishing town, and I guess it's tradition in their family. Like instead of getting the usual like coffee mug or something, I just got a huge amount of fresh haddock. And fortunately, I don't
That's
think I had
awesome.
realized how much our son liked it, and it was a good thing because I was all of a sudden had a lot to make, and it's so fresh. It was a great way to introduce them to it. So, but I love that part about connecting and talking and building those relationships because that,
Mm-hmm.
is great. There's a lot of great information on the web, including our blogs, of course, but there's nothing like just what you can get up in conversation. Somebody's been doing it all their lives. So that's an awesome tip. I know we've been talking a lot about fish, but I know you're not all of you love fish, but you've got a lot of other great tips, and we probably have to have another conversation about the dough side of what you do. But I do want to say, we officially became fall at some point last night, and so we're in fall. I'm curious if
Yeah.
you've either had any delicious fall food or something you're looking forward to in the local food department, either recent delicious meal or maybe something you're looking forward to enjoying as we're rolling into fall here?
I am a major soup lover. And so the kickoff to fall is kind of, I feel like my go ahead to make all the soups that I possibly can. And I feel like soups are such a great way because you can put anything in them. So no matter what produce we have available or what, maybe proteins we have on hand, I feel like I can always put together some kind of soup out of it.
Right.
Um, I mean, they're just so versatile, and you can go a creamy stock, or you can go a broth stock, or you can make it really hearty, or it can be light. And I think soups are definitely what get me most excited about fall.
Oh, that's excellent. Do your kids eat it as well? That's good.
Yeah, they love soup. Yeah,
Super.
and we just made a we just made a clam chowder last week from our clams from last season, and I was very surprised that they were pretty excited about it. So I
Oh,
think it's
that's
if in a
good.
soup, I can sneak all kinds of stuff, into my kids' diet.
Yeah, there are a lot of benefits to soup. It's a great way to use things up, stuff that's looking a little tired, but that too, the slipping in stuff
Yeah,
with more nutritional value that if it's sitting on the plate, they might not go for. Well, that's a great tip. Um, well, excellent. We've covered a lot of ground, and I'm starting to get hungry. I wish I don't think we have fish on our menu tonight, but definitely this weekend. Actually, in fact, we have some. I mentioned from the food share. It usually comes
yeah.
frozen, so like you, we have a couple of nice fish options in the freezer. I think I'll definitely be breaking one of those out for one of our meals this weekend. So you've definitely gotten me hungry for that. So
Nice.
great.
Yep.
Before we totally close, I think we mentioned
Yeah.
earlier your site, but let's let people know where we can find your website and other places you might be active on the social web, so people can connect and follow what you're making and catching.
Yeah, my website is dirtanddough.com. And you can also find me on Instagram, and it's at dirt.dough. So those are the two places I am most active right now.
Well, excellent. Well, I would definitely encourage people to check it out, and I'll check it out as well to follow all the good stuff you're eating. It's been great having you on the show.
Yeah, thanks, David. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cook Local, Eat Local. To get the show notes with links for recipes and resources we covered today, go to cooklocaleatlocal.com to get the podcast landing page. And please be sure to subscribe to Cook Local, Eat Local wherever you get your podcasts. Make it a great day with some tasty local food on your plate.